So I'm Jeff Hoover, Director of Library Design at Tappe Architects, where I have been, I guess I've seen more than 30 years of library design evolution. And I'm here today with Denise from the Dover Library. And I've already, Susan, is that, Susan is with you, Denise?
Yes.
So why don't you introduce yourselves and your background at the library before we jump in?
Okay. So my name is Denise LaFrance, and I am the director at the public library here since April. So I'm fairly new. So, and with me.
Hi, I'm Susan Junker, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian. I've been here at this library for about 6 years.
Yeah, and I should mention I'm new as a director, but I have been here for 21 years. So very familiar with our building.
Well, great. So that's a couple of the personalities involved here now. So I want to welcome everybody else to sort of what has been a kind of a recurring design challenge, and that is sort of preserving an early 20th century facility while transforming it for 21st century library services. And this is really only barely a 20th century building. It was opened in 1905, as I recall, just after the turn of that century. So it's way back there. So we will be examining this Carnegie-funded Dover Library for today's design challenge, and we'll be looking at not only how the building is currently organized, but also, as it turns out, at a set of preliminary renovations plans that were prepared pre-pandemic a couple of years ago. And so we'll have that resource to look at as well, not only just where they are, but where they had thought they might be going, and in some ways may still be going. And the MO for our session today, our method of operating, will be to introduce the community and the library building to you in Dover, and then indicate the pandemic-based changes that have been adopted already, and some now discarded as the pandemic and the library response moves on, and then show you this preliminary design from about 2 years ago that shows some changes to the layout of the building, because there's no real potential for expansion, right, Denise? You're pretty much landlocked in terms of your footprint.
Pretty much, yes.
And the method for incorporating, we want to ask you your opinion about this future framework that is being established for library services, and the method for incorporating your feedback will be using the Zoom tools for polling and Zoom chat and Zoom annotations, which we will walk you through if you're not familiar with those features. So in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom bar, you want to make sure you have the chat feature activated, and I'm going to do that myself. Okay, and then let me see. We just go on and introduce the library. So, where is Dover? Dover is here, and first I would like to do a poll of you all to sort of understand where you are coming from. And the question is, do you have a Carnegie library? And see what we have out there in the audience. So you should see the polling information showing up on your screen. And I see, everybody's familiar with doing this. And we're going to let it run for, until we get a large percentage of the responses recorded. I think we have about almost 90% of folks responding right now. So I'll give you another 10 seconds to make your response. Yes or no, are you working with a Carnegie library? And let's see how that turns out. So it looks like, well, about half of the folks here actually have a Carnegie to think about. And so we'll roll that into our thinking and look forward to your perspective on our building, as we go forward. Another question I'd like to ask before we get too far into it is, what kind of pandemic precipitated changes are you adopting in your libraries? Are these some of the things that you're wrestling with? Are these some of the changes that you've been able to accommodate? Everything from collection access, the first point, to increased reliance on digital services, virtual programs. I have to imagine that everybody here is going to say they're using virtual programs in an enhanced way relative to pre-pandemic. And certainly ideas about curbside service, which would be in that first one. And you should know you can stretch the size of the polling windows like any other window, so you can see top to bottom and scroll with your mouse as well. And then on the next page, if there are services you are adopting that you haven't that aren't on my list here, that will be interesting to hear from you as well. It looks like the virtual programs is really ranking the highest, although everything is getting some level of response. Now, I'll just go ahead and so we have just about 80% reporting. And what we can see is, everybody should just take a look at the way it's stacking up here. Not very many people have sprung towards the idea of adopting automated materials handling, but it's certainly an idea that we're thinking more about in terms of future library planning. You sort of a little bit more touchless processing of returns, might be a useful thing as we think about controlling the spread of viruses and other contagions, really. And moving towards buildings and sustainable building designs with indoor air quality standards that are ramped up is something we'll be doing, as we renovate and design buildings. In the few months we've had in the pandemic period, there hasn't been a lot of opportunity to be that responsive with these kinds of big picture infrastructure or results. So. Here are these results. And now I just want to ask you all if there are ideas about how to adapt to the pandemic that you have tried that haven't been listed here, or that are your favorites perhaps. And so here, if you use the Zoom annotation features, you click on the view options up there and then find the annotate button. And then the text component of that will put you in a place where then you could sort of write something in on the screen. So if you try that, if you have a pandemic precipitated challenge and something you've have done in response to that that you'd like to share with everybody, just take a minute and see if you can write anything on this screen here for me. Yes. Right. Public spaces for staff use, taking over perhaps a group study room to become an office because some of that space isn't being used, or even public meeting space, the group, multi-purpose room, putting staff accommodations into those kind of spaces. Yes, wrestling with poor ventilation. That is going to be a permanent part of a real good solution, is to improve air handling in libraries. Again, it's sort of a big infrastructure improvement to have to make. And I know Denise just got done putting air conditioning into their building finally, after 115 years, finally got air conditioning in, and it doesn't really provide any additional ventilation by its design. It's sort of by the limitation of a Carnegie building, without tearing down ceilings and opening up walls to put in ductwork. They're simply cooling the air that's already in the room. So that's going to continue to be, kind of a challenge moving forward. What else do we see? Use of meeting room space for remote learning, access by appointment. Yes. And perhaps, taking advantage of online scheduling software so that you're not sort of, as the weather begins to change, patrons aren't queuing up outside the building, waiting for a time slot to be able to get in while you're trying to maintain, reasonable social distancing within the library and limiting the amount of time each patron spends. Yes, quarantining materials in some of the rooms as well. Well, so that's great, and that's some good commentary. I'm just going to remember how to erase that starting today. But let's get into the library. again, so Dover, we've seen where it is, and oh, I forgot. I also wanted to ask, where are you? One more thing with our annotation features in this, within the software. Can we just use the stamp feature and maybe grab the star and put a star on the map, like I just did, of where you're coming from for today's discussion? Oh, look. We've got both coasts covered now, reaching into Michigan. And hello to Canada, Florida. Interesting. Okay, well, that's reasonable representation. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do want to see, oh, somebody in the middle of the country, and everybody's getting familiar with perhaps using the Zoom tools, but I mean, probably another question that would be, how many of you are really familiar with using Zoom 6 months ago? I'm sure we wouldn't get a large raise of hands for that, but here we are now, and this is our new mode of communicating. Great, so I'm just going to clear that off and go to the next topic. Now that we know a little bit about where you're coming from, and get back into where we are. So we are in Dover here, and although I'm not, I'm in Boston, but Denise is in Dover, and we're going to just sort of zoom in on her community and talk about the community profile a little bit. So Denise, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so just a little background about Dover. So it's a community of 32,000 people. Our building is about 25,000 square feet. Print materials, we have about 83,000 in our collection. Total physical items, almost 95,000. We have 14,596 active card holders, and visits to our building in 2019 were 194,123. So approximately 550 to 600 people per day. Mm-hmm. We're about half that right now, but circulation total for 2019 was 243,903 checkouts.
Right. How is circulation trending so far this year relative to a pre-pandemic time?
Well, it's the people in the building is half, but circulation is a little higher than that because we are doing curbside and things that don't require people to come in the building. And of course, our digital material numbers are skyrocketing through both Overdrive and Hoopla.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So I just got to zoom in on a couple more levels as we look at sort of where the library falls within sort of the texture of the urban fabric of Dover. You can begin to get a sense of sort of the kind of New England community that it is as we get closer and closer in. And so here we see the library, and Denise, if you would just talk about what else is sort of in the civic context and maybe commercial context right here as well.
Yeah, so our city hall is directly across the road from us. And also right next door to us is what's called the McConnell Center. It has some nonprofit organizations in it as well as some city departments. But so we're right off our Central Avenue area, which is our main street. So we are right in the city proper.
Right. And surrounded by a few other really meaningful civic services.
Yep.
And I'll also just add in that the building has, you can sort of see the classic Carnegie T-shaped plan with an addition off to the side. When was the addition done?
Late 80s.
Right. And so now that's obviously ripe for renovation together with the rest of the Carnegie. Was that the last meaningful improvement that was made to the library other than adding air conditioning this summer?
That was meaningful though. But no, I think that is the last major renovation that went on.
Okay. And I just put a little pin on Adele's, right?
You
It's
found
really
that.
important that there is great coffee real near the library, and it's also great that the helpful librarians, led me to the right place. So just to sort of get in a little bit closer on the library, landscape and such, here we see it, and I just wanted to point out that the T shape is also amended by a little wing off the back, octagonal shaped piece as well. And let me just transition to a couple other views. Here we're seeing the building, kind of in 3 dimensions, and we'll just go around. And what was the name of this center that's sort of right next door to the library?
The McConnell Center?
Right, is this a useful sort of gathering meeting space for community?
Yes, yeah, it used to be the high school
Yeah.
years ago, and then it was the middle school, and now it's got a lot of nice community space.
Right, and I see also there's quite an expansive parking lot, it seems.
But not big enough.
Not big enough, yeah.
Yeah, it's often, that is one of the complaints of people trying to get to our programs, that the parking lot is full.
Right. Okay, so now we sort of navigated around the building, and I'm going to come back down to sort of ground level at the back, just to give you a sense of the Carnegie and its addition. This is approaching from the parking lot side and into the 2 sort of openings on the right there lead us to an accessible entrance, so you can get into the building in an accessible way from that side, and that's useful because you can't get in an accessible way from the front as it's currently configured in its historic composition. And just to get a sense of how little really has changed, here's a postcard from I think probably 1910-ish, and the building today really looks just about the same as it did then. Not much has really changed. Here we see the main floor plan and the classic sort of T shape with its little appendage. It did have a little appendage on both sides, some little ears on that T before the 80s edition was made. And I'm just showing the lower level has emerged out from underneath the upper level, and it's all color coded to show a little bit about the program distribution currently. There's also a 3rd level. Bring that up here next. Just on top of here, we have a kind of a slightly smaller 3rd level with interestingly enough, with the multi-purpose room at the top there. And there's also a 4th interstitial level right on top of the adult collection space that we see there. That is, there's mezzanine. And this is in the classic, multi-tier book stack arrangement that's at the back part of almost every Carnegie library at some point in time. So that's how it's basically laid out, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about the program distribution. But first, I think we'll just take a walk, kind of through the library and get oriented. So we come, up to the front door and in. Stepping into the vestibule, looking straight ahead. We don't see up to the circ desk as you would in a classic Carnegie, because one of the improvements made in the 80s was to put the elevator here. So as you come in, you're looking at the backside of the elevator shaft. There isn't a door to the elevator at that point, however, but the door does open up onto the central circ space, which we're seeing here, together with the rest of the stairs that go up to the top and down to the bottom. So a 3-story, relatively large Carnegie library. And again, looking up, we can see through a floor opening up into the upper level. So interconnected levels, very handsomely put together. And if we were to take the elevator up, we'd arrive upstairs here, and looking up farther, you'd see that there was a skylight that, as again in the classic tradition of Carnegie's, in 1905, it was really important to take advantage of daylight. Not that it isn't now, but that skylight might be something to think about reactivating at some point and bringing more daylight down through the center of this space. And then just sort of orienting ourselves, looking back down. Right in the center of everything is the central service desk, right, Denise,
Yes.
for circulation services and general orientations and questions. Walking back downstairs around the elevator shaft, which is now sort of occupying what would have been the open space in the center of the stair, coming back, arriving here in front of the main desk and looking off to one side, we can see a fireplace down at that end of the library. And if we turn the other way, we'll see, yeah, there's a fireplace at the other end too. Very symmetrical organization of our classic Carnegie Library. One of the things that's a little different here is actually the window sill height. It's relatively high, sort of just about nose height for most people, slightly higher probably for some. So it's not a great place to sit in a chair and look out a window because you can't see out while sitting down. Interesting configuration of this Carnegie. And if we just go to the back, this is the new books browsing area, right, Denise?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay. And I think just behind, just ahead and through that door to the left is a computer alcove.
Yeah.
Right. So again, turning around, looking back towards the other end of the library, again, appreciating sort of the basic organization of the space, pausing for a moment here back at the central desk, and then moving on into the wing at the left, which is where reference is happening. So we have sort of real close proximity between the reference service desk and SelfService desk. And do you have anything to say about what's in the room or how reference is configured?
Well, it's changed through the years as our reference collection has shrank. So we do have large print in there, and we also have music CDs. I mean, we just use every little piece of real estate we can to put our collections in. Right.
And it's kind of I would say kind of a large desk for reference for the room.
And doesn't fit the beautiful Carnegie Library. It's a sort of modern modular desk. So yeah.
Right. Kind of a stylistic departure. And then so now we've stepped sort of out of the Carnegie.
Yes, we're in the 80s edition.
Right. And just I'll sort of pan around here looking, past some collection areas into seating. And I guess this is just to the left here is periodicals. And then we're going through into more AV collection here, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And some nice seating together with more general adult collection. Looks like the fiction collection is over here.
Yes, and there's usually more seating, but we did remove a lot during COVID.
And turning around, looking back, one of the things that all Carnegies wrestle with if they're being expanded is how to connect the new stuff to the old, to historic fabric. And, this building does it with kind of a tall space in between. So architecturally it makes a nice sort of separator with some daylight coming in, and also touches lightly on the historic architecture. It doesn't interfere with, the fenestration, the window openings that are created along the side, which would have been eclipsed if they'd run that ceiling in, too low for the historic architecture. But again, coming back to the middle, we're going to look at what is just behind the desk, the multi-tier book stack. And if you don't have a Carnegie, you may not be familiar with the concept of book stacks that support the floors rather than floors that support the book stacks. But that's what we have shown here. And Denise, what's not showing, though, that's really interesting about the floors here?
It's a glass floor. So if you go into the basement and look up, you can still see the glass floor under that carpeting.
Right, so there's still structural glass floor panels that are supported off the book stacks in this area, which gives a very compressed floor to floor height. The floors can be very thin. There's probably an inch thick glass with 2 inches thick of steel to support that, but very thin. But it also it has that classic library feel that I think probably a lot of people in Dover appreciate, actually, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we just moved through this book stack. There's a lovely seating alcove at the back there, and turning around and looking back, we can see the central service point in the distance there. We can see that the aisle is probably 36 inches wide, so technically wide enough to get a wheelchair down the center aisle, but that is not the case with the side aisles. And of course, in the classic Carnegie tradition, this would not have been open stacks. These would have been closed stacks, and only pages would have been and librarians would have been retrieving books from this space. And now, of course, it's an open stack, at least at this level. And that presents, ADA challenges, not only for the end of aisle space, but all the cross aisles are also less than 36 inches. And so this is, frankly, going to be one of the challenging things to address in moving this library forward and renovating it and making it ADA accessible. And if we move upstairs, now we're on the mezzanine, which is partially, I think, used here for teen services. And we can look down and see the other, the book stacks down below. But of course, this is another accessibility challenge, not only, moving through the aisles, which are, very narrow and sometimes congested with things, but getting to this level besides. And here we have, this chair positioned here, but that's not typically there, I guess, right?
No, that again is COVID. We
Right.
sort of spaced our furniture out.
Right. Okay. And so, yeah, so here's, standing at the other corner of the space, thinking about going back downstairs, past the first floor and into the basement, which is really just, sorry to embarrass you with the photograph,
Okay.
but it is storage, really. Some of it's collection storage. Some of it is other stuff storage in general to keep the library operating. And then we're not going to spend a lot of time in the rest of the basement spaces that are mostly staff spaces, but here they are, and they again present interesting accessibility challenges because they are not all on the same level, but do have a pretty good daylight for basement in a lot of the staff spaces. Although there is the creepy corridor to the restrooms there.
We had a bat flying down there last week. That was fun.
A bat?
Yeah.
Okay, it's perfectly appropriate.
Yes, exactly.
But also on the ground level, the basement level, which is also the accessible at grade level from parking, is children's. And this is right near the entrance, as you may have noticed from looking at the plans. The children's service desk with the ubiquitous plexiglass shields for sneeze guards. And if we start looking around a little bit, we see a pretty typical arrangement, I think, for a historic library with an addition in terms of, the children's collections. A lot of books and not enough space in general. And then we also have this, which is helping us address getting access to the other little levels that the building is sort of confounded with, up 4 steps into the littlest kids area of the library up here, right? And at the back there's a lovely sort of nook for sort of a little family gathering space, I would say, perhaps. But that's not where programs happen. Programs is in a separate room across the hall from where this is, children's programs, in a space that is, of course, too small, right? But not used right now, correct?
That's our quarantining room for books.
Yeah. Okay. And other spaces in children's, again, another seating area in another sort of corner of the basement area. Then we just take the elevator up to the 3rd floor to see what's up there. Off to the right there is a large multi-purpose room. And one of the purposes now is for storing furniture that had to be removed from other places in the library, but there still is some, a reasonably good resource there for hosting meetings on the 3rd level. So not an after hours accessible sort of scenario. And you're not currently having programs there.
We are having small programs. We're having some story times and things. Yeah.
So you have enough space to socially distance in the room for the,
right.
And do you open the windows or?
We have been, yes.
Yeah, for ventilation. So this brings us back to the center, and there's just like one more thing to look at over here, back towards the staff, the director's office area and other staff space. A couple more steps to think about in terms of the access challenges that the library presents us with. Okay, so that's sort of like working through the inside of the building, and now I would just reorient the image of the building and overlay the plan so we get a sense of how that all relates, and then I'll come back and look at the floor plans as we begin to think about some of the challenging things we've seen. So here are all the levels. Can you see that there?
You were frozen for a while, so
Oh, I'm sorry.
we missed what you said.
Oh, I just said that we've seen the issues, in our walk through the building, some of the issues that the library has. There may be more that aren't apparent in the images, but you have established, some ideas about how you want to move forward, changes you want to make. And so what are the goals for that in general? What kind of problems were you trying to solve? And then we can look at the opportunities that are represented in that, that plan from 2 years ago.
Okay, so we have some major space issues. We are constantly weeding because we have nowhere to put, new books and new collections. We'd like to see a better flow. I mean, we have we don't have good sight lines now from desk to desk or from room to room. It's just like we have so many nooks and crannies. Obviously, all our ADA compatibility issues are very worrisome. And we also, in this plan, the children's room moves up to the middle floor. We would love that to be more a part of the library. It seems to be really off in a corner right now. And to get the children's room away from the bathrooms, which we have a lot of issues with our bathrooms. So, yeah, so you have anything to add to that, Susan?
No, just we talked about currently the children's room has their own circulation set up down in the basement, and then if we were all on the same level, combining all circulation at the main desk instead of having 2 separate desks. That's something we talked about. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Right, and then of course you're facing new challenges with the pandemic, and so I wonder if there are I have the list that you forwarded earlier. Do you just want to just talk about the things that you're doing and some things maybe you have done and are not done with?
So yes, so we did start curbside service in May, and we also started something we call handpicked books, where the service so that people that are missing browsing our stacks can actually have us do it for them with a little bit of information that they give them. They give us. So obviously, like every other library, we've moved to virtual events. We are having some outdoor events. We are doing some story times on YouTube. Pretty much anything we can think of. We have been fitted with plexiglass shields at all our service desks. We have removed a lot of furniture to allow for social distancing. And we did make the front door, the outdoor, and the parking lot door near our children's room, the indoor. So yeah, so those are some of the things we're doing right now, as well as limiting occupancy and limiting food and drink and that sort of thing.
Right, and of course the one-way circulation through the building works for able-bodied, but
right,
not people with strollers or wheelchairs or walkers, not so much, because that front step is still a problem. So let's just begin to shift the program around, bringing children's upstairs and then taking some aspects of adult services down. So we have some seating and some popular materials, I guess, going down near the entrance, and some reading area coming into that spot in children's that was up 4 steps. So we have that little sort of basement alcove or little cave there for reading. And then another move, shifting adult collections around into spaces that are, been vacated from the new books and browsing stuff being moved down, and moving the PCs out of a back corner, kind of tucked away into a more public space, maybe shrinking the reference service point, and expanding the staff point, because you are, of course, hampered in terms of the staff space in the library right now, especially, on a patron service level. So other things were to bring teens down and put adult collection and adult seating up onto the mezzanine. So those are some of the moves, and none of it really directly addressed some of the infrastructure challenge. This is really addressing sort of a strategic organizational issue about where things best belong in the library for your service population. But we still have in this preliminary sketch, and I should give a shout out to Stroller Associates for producing these sketches from a couple of years ago as the design professionals helping you with that. But they didn't address yet the access issues. Every little red square with hatch lines in it is a set of stairs. And this is independent of the main stair, right? This is just other stairs, other places in the building that you might have to navigate just to get around. And, so that's another level of challenge. And so the spaces that now have the red outlines on them, those are spaces that aren't accessible within the library. And it's quite a lot of square footage right now that just, you can't technically have them be public spaces because they are not meeting the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act for any reasonable level of accessibility. There, now we've transitioned to actually the final plans that the Stroller Associates drew for us, or for you. I'm including me in your group now. And this is what they called Test Fit 5. So they went through a couple of iterations before getting to this. And what I would like to do now is just think about what we have done and where else we might go, because these were plans from a couple of years ago, obviously pre-pandemic, and everything has changed since then. And even without the pandemic, some ideas have evolved in terms of library services that will have, perhaps some impact on how we might plan this building. But let's think about the sort of the pandemic influences and how they might influence this plan. Have we been doing these ideas, recognizing the influence of the pandemic? What might we have seen? And so I'm just going to ask you again to think about what ideas about kinds of services that have evolved as a result of the pandemic that we might want to make accommodations for here. Are there concerns or opportunities that you see in this arrangement relative to how you might plan a layout with a pandemic preparedness perspective with that sort of hat on? And so again, I would say, use the annotation tool to type, so again, it's like go into the view options and it should be a pull down menu for annotate. It may still be open for you, and click on the text and go ahead and type in some comments and observations that you have about this library or your library that are accommodations that might influence how the plan evolves. Just take a few minutes and share with us any ideas you might have. And I'll just chime in with the thoughts about that first topic there about pop-in services, because what I mean by that is offering up a piece of the library, not the whole library footprint, perhaps, for limited access to partial collections. And I think that the way that the plan has happened to evolve is in a way that, a piece of the library could be made accessible for these kind of services. And it wouldn't necessarily be with the rest of the library open. Probably you might also want to have the toilet facilities and large print may be accessible, or maybe also the reading room. And so kind of what we're already seeing is that the library could have various levels of being open. And this isn't just a sort of a pandemic level response thing, but it's sort of a future forward way of thinking about the library in terms of maybe restrictions on operating budgets in a future time. It's like, oh, we're only open on, 3 weekdays a week, but on the other days, on Tuesday and Thursday, we're partially open to limited services. And it can be a useful strategy for keeping the library services flowing even under restricted budgets. And in this case, maybe just flowing in terms of, a constrained piece of library that can be opened in a sort of heightened emergency response to something like a pandemic, where the whole building can't be accessed, not for seating necessarily, but for access to collections. And so what do we see here? Some secure place for after hours pickup. Right, to do the curbside service and after hours ideas, it really requires in-house infrastructure. I mean, it's an out-of-building service, but we need to have the right, staging area indoors to make that happen. What else we got here? Yes, there isn't currently an idea about 24/7 access or being able to get to do book pickup through a window, right? It's all going to be, you take it out to the curb, literally, right?
We put it in on a book truck under our covered area in the children's entrance.
Okay. Yes, and making the create space, I think, would also be an opportunity for technology. The create space we see as part of that overall zone. Thinking of the notes that we're seeing here. Okay, well, that's this gives us some level of interesting feedback about these comments. I think I'll just go ahead and clear those and go on to the next our next thought about the building. In this case, in general, sort of in a big picture way of looking at programming your library, what seems, and I'm just curious to know if we got to stuff the right size. Are the parts, any part of this seem too large? Any parts seem too small? And then on the next page, we can also write in, or maybe on this one, well, what's missing? Are there things that you're doing in your library now that you don't see in this one, or you're planning to do in your renovation or new library building that you would add? So first of all, let's just look at, does this look like the right proportions to you? Is there anything here that seems, too large? And I would, include everything from collection space to, have we overdone it for staff space? Is children's right size? Do children's be bigger? Is teens, is that the kind of allocations that you're currently making for teens? And what about the browsing area for new books and media? And just also reading spaces for people to spend time in the library, not necessarily interfacing with collections or staff, but just having a space to maybe be in the context of other like-minded people, reading and studying and thinking. And I think I'll go ahead and stop this in just about 10 more seconds, so quick. And a couple of results are coming in. I'll just now share these results. Hopefully you can see those on the screen. There's some thought, just for your information, Denise, about what everybody else is thinking. And of course, they don't understand your demographics exactly. So it's going to be a very sort of broad brush approach here. But adult collections came up together with staff spaces as things that are looking large relative to the sort of the pie chart of spaces and space allocation. And even service points in MultiPurpose Room came up one. And friends is a good question. How much space to allocate to the friends activities in the library? Stuff that looks short on study space, and I think you probably knew that there isn't a lot of.
We would love to have more study space.
Right. And seating and reading areas, studies, seating and reading, and maybe children's look like, oh, if only we could make those bigger. that would be great. So that's maybe useful information, at least it lets you know how the world outside of your community might be looking at what you're thinking about doing. Right, and here's some notes. Depending on demographics, children seem large. If you could also add, what are the things that what's missing altogether? Is there anything? I mean, I think that in a way, you know, as we walked through the library, we didn't see really a group study room anywhere. So that'd be something that is, you know, missing. What about other contemporary ideas about library services that might be missing? Anything come to mind? Maybe not. Maybe we've got it nailed. Study cubicles. And toilet, yeah, second floor bathrooms. You probably have all the toilet facilities are consolidated on the lower level. Am I right?
Yeah, in the new plan, there was one to be installed in the children's room.
Okay.
On the main floor.
On the main floor, yeah. So with the children's moved up. Okay.
And we weren't confident that our adult fiction collection would fit into the former browse room in the new plan without heavy weeding.
Right.
And that's one size.
Right. So this is to be adult fiction, that adult
Yeah.
collection space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. It's a kind of a small room, and it'd be a shame to fill it with really tall book stacks also, because it's kind of an elegant space with a fireplace, etc.
Yeah, we had it cleared out. We have DVDs in there and the new materials, and we took the DVDs out and put them upstairs in the lecture hall right after COVID, and that just made such a beautiful space opening, and people just praised it so much. Now the DVDs, most of them have come back down into that room. But
so when I visited, probably it was open and clear, right? The picture.
Well, you had pictures of the DVDs in there when you from your slides.
Yeah, I think they had just moved.
Yeah.
Back. Did you have them completely cleared out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
We got one big round table in the middle, which is now up in the lecture hall in storage, but and then the perimeter is all new materials.
Does that make you rethink about what you might really want to do with that kind of elegant space on the main level, or do you really have a choice?
Well, it's like we almost don't have a choice because we have tried to fit our collection into this box that's too small.
Yeah.
Right. And I see that there are also, somebody mentioned here that there are many suggestions in the chat, which may be easier for people to use. I'll just read some of them. Or you can all see them, right? You all see the chat there. So look there also. And this will be recorded so we can reference them later as well for Denise's benefit. But you know, space for collaborative groups with technology, yes, and other kinds of group work. Yeah, the notion of being with technology, meaning maybe some shared technology, so a group can all interact with digital content at the same time. Okay. Anything else to add here? Any other questions you'd like to ask, Denise, of everybody?
No, I just saw the thing. So we actually do have an entire historical room that is on the third floor.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't actually go in there to get a picture of it, but it does exist, and it's next to the trustee meeting room. Now, does the trustee meeting room serve as a kind of a study room as well,
Yes.
or typically, maybe not during COVID? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right now it's our staff room, but typically it gets used quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. By groups, not individuals, I take it, right?
Both.
Oh, okay.
And there's another smaller room currently in use that's more for tutoring, maybe small, very small.
Yeah, quite small.
Yeah, there's another interesting comment here, which was, could the multi-purpose space on the third floor also be, or maybe instead of the space on the ground floor, be used as your create space? Or do you need something that's more permanently established. The reason it comes up here, but the reason I ask is there's a lot of emphasis on making these create spaces be really nimble and reconfigurable, because it's not just digital, sometimes it's analog, people working with their hands and some tools, and other times using, digital devices to make tangible content, and sometimes it's just all completely digital, making digital content. So they have to be, to be successful, I think, really reconfigurable and adaptable, just like a multi-purpose room. So did you give that some thought? Or
No, but we would love things to be flexible. Our children's room just was gifted some money to buy new shelving, and that's all movable. So yes, we would love things to be more flexible.
yeah, I mean, it might be freeing up some space on your ground floor real estate if you decided you could accommodate that create activity in the multi-purpose room. But it brings up the question about storage, I guess. When you're not doing one activity, you need to break it down and set it up for another activity. And where does storage happen? Not on the third floor, probably.
There's a tiny closet on the third floor, and then the basement that the messy basement that you saw is our main storage area.
Right. And there's this question: what is in the closed collection? I labeled it closed collection because
oh yeah,
I don't know if you really have collection that's being stored there, or if it.
We do have some items that we put down there because we don't have room for them upstairs, and so we have to get them for people.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly classic materials, not all, but that's the bulk of it. And then some DVD overflow, because that is a large collection and we're not able to weed it. It self-weeds, if anything, just by people not returning things or whatever, but it's just constantly in use. And
interesting. In a way, you have less collection space available to you in the Carnegie building than the Carnegie building offered when it was new, because they could use, all the collection was a closed stack, and it was intensively filled with very densely packed books top to bottom, and you really can't use it that way quite right now.
Exactly.
Let me see what else we got here. Combining reference and circulation. How about the notion of a single service point as opposed to, they're really close, right? In the revised plan idea.
Actually, on the main floor, it would be one central circulation desk. But we would have to have one on the lower level because they are so far apart.
Sure, and that'd be convenient access.
And the nature of that room in the center of the T, as you said, where our current circulation desk is now, it's pretty narrow. And as far as flow of traffic through the hub, basically, of the building, we can't make anything much bigger, which is very limiting. So in terms of putting reference with circulation, I think is what you were driving at.
Yes.
We decided that wasn't going to work with the bones of the building as they are.
Right. You're not going to be moving any historic walls around to make more elbow room. But how many people do you think, the library of this size need to be at the central desk? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 1? And sort of during your
3. Yeah, I'd say 3.
3 people to manage everything. I think that's at a glance, that sort of sounds like a lot, but I have to acknowledge that your patrons aren't doing a lot of self-service. They're not checking out their own books at the self-service station in general.
Right. Not as many as we thought would use it.
Right. And that would make a difference. It could make a difference in terms of the size of your service.
Right.
Yeah.
If, most people were checking out their own books. So.
And then if we combine the children's with the adult, that's really going to make that space a lot denser with family units and older adults with maybe crutches or wheelchairs or whatever. It's just, I'm very concerned. That's my department, so that's what I'm most concerned about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a lot of stuff has come up here to think about in terms of, refining, refining the plan. So I'm just going to clear this and we'll go on and look at whatever other topics we have coming up. Let's see here, the general layout. Back to the initial point, do you think that the library got it right in terms of, the redistribution and what belongs on what floor? We can talk about it a little bit more, but just ask the question in general. What do you think about the basic move of moving children up and moving adult services down next to the accessible entrance? Good move? Or would you say, I do it just the opposite? Are you ready to move children's down and adults up? So this is, sort of how it broke down. Yes, it looks like the majority of people in the room with us here today can see the logic for moving children's up. And what I'd like to do is just say, talk about, why that works, or why, what are the pros and cons about that? And you must have wrestled through these in your head, or maybe it just seemed obvious to you at the library.
That to move the children's rooms upstairs, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, when we saw Test Fit 5 and that was the one that did that, we all love that idea.
It's not like it's the first thing you tried. It did take till Test Fit 5 to come up with this idea, huh?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So some of the, I see, comments coming up in the chat. It's good to keep adults away from children. And I don't know if this helps you with that. They do have their own sort of zone of the library. They're all off in, sort of past the barrier that's established of the edge of the historic building. As you go past that edge, then you're into children's with teens just outside. What else here?
Yeah, I think the one problem that I could see with moving it upstairs is the stroller traffic. Right now it's by the exit and it fills the hallway, which is a challenge, but bringing them that much further into the building, I think will cause some congestion, to say the least.
Right. What do you do for stroller parking? Is that a big deal to accommodate the strollers?
They're sometimes in the hallway. Some people leave them outside under that covered area. Yeah, some people bring them into the children's room. So, yeah.
Yeah, when we've had to put, several of our recent libraries have had children's on an upper level. And one of the comments is often about, well, the children have to go up the stairs to get there. And the rebuttal to that is often, well, it's better than having the seniors have to go up the stairs. Children love running up the stairs.
Exactly.
Right.
By contrast, but there is the stroller issue, certainly, that's always going to be a factor. I think that one of the things it creates the opportunity for also is kind of a family gathering opportunity. Previously, you had teens up on the mezzanine and children down in the basement, and if you're grandma coming to the library with the school-age kid and the teenager, where's your place in the library that allows you to sort of function? I think that in this context, there's a space, in this redesign that could really work. I could see, hanging out in this zone of the library, or, as a place where you could sort of keep an eye on the full spectrum of the kid population that you're there to monitor. So it does have that attribute too.
It seems to have better flow for all ages.
Okay.
Another challenge I see in the current building, and no real solution in the other plans, are visibility for people coming into the building. We can't see on the main level the front door. We can't obviously see the downstairs door. So people come up the stairs, and there's a great opportunity for lack of safety if somebody comes in with a bad intent in mind. No real warning for that. And as far as greeting people, it's very closed in and difficult to, I like the new designs that are open and spacious at the entryways.
Right. Carnegie has a couple of open spaces typically. They got the great reading rooms that flank the central service point by design, but there aren't a lot of flexibility with the infrastructure, the architecture between those points, and that's something that's very different from modern libraries. I'm just going to go on to another point, because some of the things you're talking about relate to, I think, accessibility and the available space that we have. Let me just get rid of that drawing. And I think it's worth talking about, the historic front door. It's not accessible, so that with children's, moving up, maybe coming in the front door would be could be more of an opportunity conceivably, but it isn't accessible in any case. And I just, wonder, what everybody here thinks about potentially making that accessible. So I'll go ahead and sort of ask the question, should we make the front entrance accessible with a poll? Let me see if I can, there it is. And get some perspective on that. It is a historic building, so we know that there will be challenges, but I mean, should it be a goal to begin with? And then if it is a goal, we can start figuring out how to make it happen. But is it even worth considering? So we get a couple more thoughts in on this, and then I'll share the polling results. Should we make that entrance accessible as well as having the other one? Of course, the Americans with Disabilities Act plainly states that all entrances to the building will need to be accessible. So right now, the building is not complying with that federal law. And I'll go ahead and just see where we fall here. Yeah, the consensus is probably we're thinking about how difficult would it be. And if you have ideas, I mean, we can mention it in chat, or else write it right on the drawing about what do you think that, how would you go about it? And maybe I'll go back a slide so we get to see a picture of the problem.
Jeff, I would say that the only space we have for expansion on the grounds would be in the front of the building, because we have a rather large lawn down to the street. And the way that central elevator shaft blocks the entrance from view from the desk and makes it a tight entrance in and out, I think maybe expanding out towards the front might solve some of those issues.
Right, and of course, in the front is is a slope to begin with. The front yard slopes down. It's not terribly steep, but it's certainly not flat either. And that is that slopes down to the main street. And sidewalks and pedestrian approach comes from that direction, although not parking necessarily. Parking is really on the back of the building, so that's helpful. In terms of you already have an accessible entrance that allows that to work. So I think it is challenging. And of course, the way to accommodate entrance here is with I would say a ramp, right? I mean, everybody say, oh, we put a ramp on the front of the building and we've nailed it. But ramps aren't very attractive on the front of historic buildings such as this. And another approach would be to do a sloped walkway, which, if it's less than a certain pitch, doesn't need to have the guardrails and all that, the accoutrements to go with a ramp wouldn't need to be incorporated if the topography allows us to do a more gentle slope and essentially bring the landscape and the sidewalk up to the entrance point of the library. So that's something probably worth studying. It does still amount to some change in character. And probably it would mean, taking the steps off and moving them, forward so that we could bring, a sloped walk up to the landing and still have the stair approach. So it'd be some change, but might be acceptable change in terms of the character of a historic building. So, you know, in New England, where I'm based here, we're wrestling with historic libraries all the time and these challenges, and we've seen that there are a handful of ways that can be employed to get it to happen. But I'm just going to touch base on sort of the other technical challenge relative to accessibility. Where should the vertical circulation be? And I wonder if we should, you know, think about moving the elevator. Right now, it plugs up the center of the historic stair, and people love the historic library for the character that it has, but it lost some character when the elevator went in that space, and it does make it hard to see who's coming and going from the library. And we could do that, or we could maybe add a lift or lifts to get to the various levels, and we'd have to do them in all of these spots in order to make all those spaces accessible, and also one at the front door. If we could get a walkway to get us to the door, we step inside and we wouldn't be able to go anywhere unless we had a lift, or if the elevator had a door on that side, which it doesn't. So maybe another lift, which would, you know, have to run, you know, up the stairs as they do to get access there. We may not have to do one that goes down the stairwell, but this is what it would take, you know, more or less, to get access to all those spaces that used to have red lines around them, with a series of lists spread around the building like this. And my guess is probably that we would have spent at least 3/4 the cost of moving the elevator by buying all these lifts. So there's just, you know, to think about it. I mean, it's difficult to think, oh, let's move the elevator as a concept because it sounds so difficult and expensive. But it may not be so much more expensive than than the lift solution. So if I take the lifts off and then think about what if we were to move the elevator, because all those spaces are still excited. What about putting the elevator over there instead and opening that space up, which would then make all of these spaces, including the mezzanine, you know, be accessible. I left the little lift at the front door, again, because you come in that front door and we still need to be able to get up to the main level somehow. But that's just, you know, an option. And, you know, one of the things to think about also is the space for collections. There's a certain potential to make the collection at the space for collections at the lowest level not be storage. If that space could be made more delightful and more accessible, then we could eliminate maybe the pressure on the upstairs, you know, historic, pristine, lovely spaces by pushing some collection in an accessible way down to the lower stack, possibly. So, I mean, what do we heard in the chat? Probably a lot of stuff. And you all can see this as well as I can. Oh, yes, disability ramps in historic Greek temples. How about that? I didn't know. And an upvote for moving the elevator. Any other observations about it? Let's see. Use the community building next door. How about that? Do you guys have a relationship with your neighbor that you could, you know, are their facilities more accessible, and do they have great meeting space over there?
They do. They are accessible because it was completely renovated 10 to 15 years ago. But their open space for meetings, they are busy also. I mean, but by not only them, but by the general public.
Our former director had a vision of building a bridge over the driveway between connecting the two buildings, and that went nowhere. But yes, it would be nice to spread out and use some space. But again, the parking lot is shared between those two, ourselves and them, and that's you know, more use of the buildings increases the parking problems and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe the creation space could be a piece of program relocated, as long as you could staff it well, you know, of course.
Right. That's part of the problem.
Right.
For me, the mezzanine is really the biggest challenge, I think, for all staff. What do we put on the mezzanine that is not accessible I realize if we do any renovation, we have to make it accessible. But it's just such an oddball little space that we struggle with constantly.
Yeah, it seems like an odd space, but also seems kind of a delightful space at the same time. And if you have collection capacity elsewhere, maybe it just really becomes that seating loft that is that little bit remote place where you're still, I mean, it would, really appeal to the people who really love books to be sort of in a perch point above the collection like that, hanging out and that would be really a distinct and different place. Maybe it's the quiet reading room, because downstairs at the 3 levels below or 2.5 levels below is where sort of the active part of adult services is happening, with the new books browsing area and create space, which could be quite like your noisy place of the library. So I think it has that potential, of course, once it's made accessible. Let's see, what else do we have to think about in the context of these? Oh yes, we just talked about this. And collections. Yeah, I'd already sort of delved into this notion of where do we put the books? We know they're in the book stack wing, but once we make those collections accessible, they're going to take up more space. Is there anything that could be, made smaller? And I think maybe some of this is covered in the questions about what things are too large. But is it worth sort of thinking about making other things smaller in order to get more collection space, for instance, on the main level? Is there any give or push and pull that could be realized?
We have been waiting for years, thinking that we would be able to shrink our DVD collection, our music CD collection, and books on CD, and they still continue to be extremely popular.
Right.
When we talked about it 5 years ago, we thought that those collections would maybe be almost gone, but they're not.
Well, it's a digital divide. That's
Yeah.
an indication.
Right. Well, it's still a potential land bank, as I say, within the library footprint. So we think about where we're putting the audiovisual collection. If we imagine that eventually it's going to move to everything streaming, I don't know, maybe I'm on that side of the digital divide, but I haven't taken a DVD or CD out of the library in 7 to 10 years. And nor anybody in my family, but again, that positions us perhaps again along the digital divide. Yeah, that's a space that becomes a potential future resource once the use of that diminishes. Again, I'm just direct you to chat because that seems to be the place people prefer to comment, and that's great. Robbins Library, Arlington. Huh. Yes, there's a notion about where do people want to go to get to quiet. And usually it's deeper into the library rather than having it most accessible from the front door, typically. That's what you would be achieving here. So let's just talk about how else to manage the collection here. In order just to think about how do we make this collection become accessible, these closed book stacks. I'm just going to mark off here zones of book stack that need to be removed. The end aisles were too tight, so we have to make them wider. And that means we have to take out 3 feet of collection on each side, because in the construction of these book stacks, we can only work within the 3-foot modules. So those collections would go away. But also, if you look closely at every aisle, and it's probably a little difficult to see on the screen, but we have to take half the books off in order to make enough cross aisle space to go, or not cross aisle, but to go down the aisles each way. So if I just bring up the pictures here, it's like, yeah, we have to take out the books that are on that side, have to go away in order to make, sort of the floor space here wide enough for a wheelchair to go down. That's what you have to do. And then at the end aisle, yeah, we have to take all those book stacks, that 3-foot section there, out in order to get down the side aisles. So this is what the problem is in terms of reusing that multi-tier book stacked. And it's I love them, but they are difficult to reuse. And it really results in, like I say, less than half of your current collection could be put in that space. And that's why I began drawing collection in the basement, because where it's called the closed collection, if we could make that accessible and make it be open collection, then we can redistribute the books on those stacks in a way that maybe works. So that's one way of going about it. And sort of, I'll skip ahead of this. The other way is to rebuild the floors, so that the book stacks aren't holding up the floor. So it'd mean gutting that wing of the building, taking all of that erector set of self-supporting book stacks out, and building structural floors, and doing it with very thin construction still, because you haven't got a lot of head height before you hit the basement floor, which you may remember seeing in the basement, some steps up between levels. That I think that floor rests on bedrock or something. And so the basement level stays where it is, the main level stays where it is. We have to put very thin construction in and build it in a way that supports book stacks, which could be positioned anywhere we want in that space, or do anything else you want with that space over time, meaning over the next couple of generations of time, you would have the ability to use that space somewhat differently. And, so putting normal book stacks with normal spacing on these levels. So that's, kind of a different way of going about it. And I just like to ask everybody, so what do you think about it? Is this something that Denise and her trustees and board and community should talk about, and the pros and cons of this, and the costs, of course? We talk about, moving an elevator and building new floors. And this is much more of a intensive capital project than, say, moving children's up and redoing the carpeting, and repainting. It's like, this is, perhaps at another level of investment and infrastructure improvement. But I think it could be realized in a way that still doesn't sort of compromise the historic integrity of the building. I mean, that book stack wing will be impacted, but we'll still have books in it, and we'll have the capacity to say, sometime in the future we have fewer books and more seating in that area. And we maybe have seating in the loft today and book stacks later, or book stacks up there now and seating later. Or maybe we just say that the loft is, we're not going to structure it for 150 pounds a square foot in the loft. We'll only put seating up there. And that way we can use lighter construction and really put the collection in basement and main level. But, the consensus amongst us here today is really that, probably it's worth studying. At least as you go forward. It may be a non-starter just because of the cost factor that's involved there, but there it is. So yes, we just had this discussion. Has anybody done something like this in your Carnegie? I wonder. I see North Conway did this, huh?
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Way, huh?
And somebody also mentioned in the chat that another library made their mezzanine into staff workspace. Offices, which we actually did talk about, but then our concern became, if we put more things on the third floor, that would have to be staffed. So we'd have 3 floors to staff, which is difficult. Right.
I mean, sometimes it's nice to distribute staff throughout the library, but if you put them on a floor where nobody else is, that's not really counting as, better supervision, I guess.
Right.
Yes. Does this mean that all stacks will need to be accessible? Yes, of course, all the stacks would need to be accessible. So it does, I think part of the overall agenda will be to make all the levels, accessible to the greatest extent possible. And so, if we did that, if we put collection downstairs, we'd have to get access to it as well. It is a lot of library to supervise, given that it is 25,000 square feet on 3.5 floors. That's a lot of levels for that amount of square feet. How are you managing to staff it, and will the renovations make that better?
Well, presently we're really only staffing the 2 floors.
Right. But
You
your
know,
workroom is on the lower level, right? Or,
And my office is on the 3rd floor, so I can see what's happening in the meeting rooms, but we wouldn't want to have, need to staff a 3rd floor.
so the 3rd floor really isn't considered a staff public level in that way.
Right.
So when a patron needs to, or group needs to use the trustee room for a group meeting, how do you manage that?
So the circulation desk would deal with that and, assign the room, and they just go up and use the room.
Okay, is it locked typically?
No,
No, okay.
they're 1905 doors. I don't even know if we have the keys.
All right, I think that, I mean, we're kind of close to the end of our time period. We've kind of covered all the topics. I think I had maybe another one to look at. No, it's coming back back around to where we started and thinking about, our pandemic challenges and other challenges and relative to the historic library. And I think through our discussion, we've sort of revealed that some of them are relatively easily accommodated, and some of them are more difficult to accommodate. And I don't have a separate poll for this, but maybe just in chat in general, given where we are today with pandemic responsiveness in libraries, do you think that a Carnegie building is a more difficult problem to solve than, say, a 1980s or later library building? And probably Denise, you probably have some thoughts about, if I didn't have this Carnegie, I could solve some of these problems. But maybe that's not it. What do you think?
Well, I had a staff member mention earlier from something she heard in one of the morning workshops was, we just need to buy the building up the street that is a small, like, strip mall type thing, all on one floor and renovate that, which I know a lot of communities have done.
Right, at 25,000 square feet, you're really not too big to fit all its services comfortably on one floor. I mean, if you were 100,000 square feet, that'd be a different matter. But at 25, a single story library can be kind of a great solution. I'm just looking at the chat. So I think we have like until 3:20 for this, right? Am I right about that? And that's in about a minute. And did I miss something on that last one? No. Okay, so I just, that sort of brings us around to the end of our time. And I think we've covered a lot of good stuff, but is there anything else that anybody else wants to ask or suggest about the project in Dover, or about Carnegie's in general, or about pandemic in general and responsiveness? And if not, I will say it was great to have you all here with us today. And I appreciate very much all of the feedback that was offered. And this session was recorded, so we can refer back to it later if there are as needed.
I would like to thank everybody for their ideas as well, and especially for you, Jeff, for giving us a lot to think about. A lot.
Right. Well, see you all later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.